Just a reminder, everybody, we're doing things a little bit different this year. So you do need to be on for the duration in order to get the CE code. We won't be sharing the CE slide at the end. We are just going to go see who was attending for the duration. And then we have your email addresses, unless, of course, you are showing up by phone, in which case, please tell me. But we will send an email out later to those who participated the whole time. So you do need to participate the whole time to get that email. So yeah, that is that. Thank you so much for being on today. And welcome to today's School Health Learning Collaborative, Brainpower. Boost your knowledge of return to learn after concussion. My name is Andrea Riley. I'm the School Health Liaison at Children's and the State School Nurse Consultant for Nebraska. Our presentation today is the result of a culminated effort to bring concussion best practices into Nebraska schools. There are a lot of people working behind the scenes to bring you these resources today. So before we begin, I'd like to say some special thanks. First of all, to the Nebraska Department of Education, to Zainab Rita, Erica Wibbles, Darsha Pelland, and Amber Harsock. I'd also like to say thank you to Children's Sports Medicine, who's been instrumental in helping us get the right wording on things, including Dr. Cody Moffitt and Carrie Waple, and Children's Community Health and Advocacy, who will be printing some of these resources. And I'd especially like to thank the woman who brought us all together today, and that's Peggy Reicher, the president of the Nebraska Brain Injury Alliance. And so now I'll introduce our speaker for this very important topic today, Dr. Karen McAvoy. Karen is a duly credentialed as a clinical and a school psychologist. She's practiced as a clinical psychologist at Denver Children's Hospital, Seattle Children's, and as a director of the Center for Concussion with Rocky Mountain Hospital for Children. She's also practiced as a school psychologist for 20 years and continues to provide project-based brain injury consultation to the Colorado Department of Education since 2010. Dr. McAvoy is the author of the REAP manual, which you'll talk about today. So you're going to hear these things straight from the source because she invented this resource. It's a community-based interdisciplinary team approach to concussion management, customized in 17 plus states. And she's also the co-founder and owner of Get Schooled on Concussions, a website and training curriculum empowering educators to own, oversee, and direct return to learn efforts for students with cognitive inefficiencies from concussion. And the TACT tool is available in 7 states. We'll talk about that today as well. When not working directly with school districts, Dr. McAvoy tests and treats adults and children post-concussion or traumatic brain injury in an integrative rehabilitation clinic. Her clinical and school psychology background allows her to be the bridge between the medical and educational implications of concussion. And she is just a wonderful person to work with. I'm so glad I've gotten to know her over these past few months working together. And I'm glad to bring her to Nebraska today. So without further ado, here's Dr. Karen McAvoy talking to us about Brainpower, Return to Learn After Concussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea. What a great introduction and what a great turnout. Obviously, everybody's very interested in concussion. It's nice to see everybody back. I know for a while we were missing all of you because of COVID. We couldn't quite get to nurses. Everyone was busy with dealing with COVID, and now we're back to dealing with concussion. So what we did during that time was to pull together some great resources for you. Like Andrea said, we've been working with the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska for a number of years to bring that into you. And now it kind of all comes together for the start of this school year. So I am excited to do a little presentation on concussion, but mostly going to focus on showing you guys the REAP manual, which is something that your state has brought in for you, as well as the TACT, which is the return to learn component, which as an educator myself in schools, that's primarily what I like to work with is, how do we help these kids academically while we're waiting for those couple of weeks of them recovering from the concussion. So if you guys are okay, what I'm going to do is share my screen and start with my presentation. And I will be sure to leave some time at the end for some questions. All right, so let me share. Of course, it's not in the right place. There we go. Okay, can you all see my Brainpower slide? All right, great. Okay, so I love what you titled it in Nebraska. So we are going to use your brain power to bring in all of this information into your schools to try to get our kids supported as much as possible through the whole process of concussion, which is return to play, return to learn, and return to life and social activities. But when I start my presentations, I always start at the beginning. We started concussion with return to play. We all know that early in the 2000s, we started having young students who had a concussion, went back to play too soon, had another hit to the head, and had either catastrophic brain damage or death as a result of second impact syndrome. And this was something that was happening to our middle and high school students all over the country. And everybody has a story of that. So in early 2000s, we started moving forward with protecting our youth athletes because of the concerns with return to play. So this is your law in Nebraska. Every state has a return to play law now. As you saw in my last slide, it used to just be certain states here and there, but all states now have a return to play law. And so I'm not telling you anything yet that you don't already know. This is your law, and it covers the three areas that all laws cover, which is education, removal from play, and return to play. And then you guys have an extra component that was added, which is your return to learn, which is great. We just want to fill in some of that right now. The way that I came to this area was that I was the school psychologist at Grandview High School when Jake Snakenberg passed away in Colorado from second impact syndrome. So he was a freshman football player in 2004. He had a concussion, was taken out. The next week he returned. He had a small hit to the head. He collapsed on the field and was airlifted off. And the next day, when they took him off of life support, he passed away from second impact syndrome. And that is why I wrote REAP in 2009. So just like Colorado, you have your components, concussion management, which is education to some stakeholders. So in your state, it's coaches, youth athletes, and their parents. It's removal from play if there's a suspicion of concussion. And then there's return to play with under certain healthcare providers. And then you have your extra amendment for return to learn protocol. But if you live in the world that I live in, all of those three or four areas of black and white mandates or guidance don't really answer the questions that we deal with every day. Like, what do we do about going back to school? What do we do about AP classes? And what do we do about the prom? And all of those questions that we have to deal with every single day that fall between removal from play and return to play. There's that whole management component. So that's what we're going to try and fill in a little bit for you. More of the shades of gray today to help you with your protocols in your schools. And we also know that concussion management is much more than return to play and return to play for athletes. It is actually returning to school, returning to learn, returning to social activities. And what do we do to help all of our students who have concussions, even if they're not athletes? What about our student who falls off their bicycle or gets in a motor vehicle accident? So there are more components that we want to talk about in terms of, are you ready for concussion management this year? And it's sure all the things that's covered in your law, education, identification, removal from play, and then return to play, but also the things in between. We're going to introduce you to the REAP manual, which, like Andrea said, is an interdisciplinary team approach to concussion management. Here in Colorado, it is the guidance that we use by our Colorado Department of Education for all Colorado schools. So we're aligning that with Nebraska. We're in the process of finishing up the final touches to your Nebraska REAP manual, and then we'll be able to get this out to you and show you what that looks like. If you want to download the current updated version of Colorado REAP, you can go to nasha.org/REAP. Like I said, the 2024 version for Nebraska is not yet ready, but you can get it and download the 2018 version if you want to see how it looks so far. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time on the TAC, the Teacher Acute Concussion Tool, which is your return to learn process within your concussion management protocol. So let me just show you quickly the flow chart that the Colorado Department of Education put together. So we have REAP, but our nurses said we just need a real quick, easy guide to be able to walk through what do we do when we have a student with a concussion. And so you can see that's what we have here. That takes you from the point of identification to return to play. And we hyperlinked right in there the TACT, the Colorado TACT, so that you can, or all of our schools can go straight to return to learn via the TACT. So look what Nebraska did. They did the same thing. This is your guidelines, although this is still being finished. So we're not going to give you a copy of this yet because there are a few areas that we're still tweaking. But within your guidelines, it's going to follow the steps in REAP, and it's also going to hyperlink you to the TAC so that your return to learn component can be as easy as clicking on that and going straight in to the Nebraska TAC. So a little background on REAP. It's the interdisciplinary team approach, and it covers 4 teams. So the family team, the medical team, orange and green. But the blue teams are the school teams. So we felt like when we wrote REAP, we had to have not only kind of the physical side, which was the coach and the athletic trainer, we also had to have the academic side, the teachers, the counselors, and the school nurse often falls on both of those. So depending on where you fall in your district and what your role is, you might fall in either of the blue teams, which would be the school teams. And knowing what each other does is important. So we have this time frame within REAP that helps you walk through the first 4 weeks of a concussion because, as we said, I'm sorry, in the last slide, 70% of kids with a concussion get better in 28 days. So we need to support these kids for the first month. And we all need to know what we need to do at various parts. We're not all doing the same thing at the same time. So when I start a presentation with any district I'm working with, I just start with what I call the points of vulnerability. This is it's just a list of questions that is on the getschoolsedonconcussions.com website. If you want to download this, I consider this like a home inspection. So when I'm working with a school district, the first thing I say is, what do you have covered in your district in terms of concussion, and where do we need to add some support? So if you want to download this and answer the questions with your district, this is kind of like our home inspection. And do we have a leaky roof? Are we ready to go this year? Most districts have return to play in place, but not all the others. So I'm going to kind of walk through these and show you how, if you don't have these areas in place, some of the new resources we will bring in might help you with that. So let's start with education and identification of a concussion. So in our points of vulnerability, what does your law say about education? Well, you have there education to coaches, athletes, to parents, to guardians, about the symptoms of concussion and when to seek medical attention. That's great. But do you have also education to your teachers? Do you have education to your health techs? Do you have education to your playground supervisors? That might be where bringing in REAP and other trainings will help. I know you already have a lot of things in place. I know REAP is something that the Brain Injury Alliance has been using in Nebraska. Trainings in your community. Children's Nebraska does great trainings. So when we get your new REAP, we can, have QR codes and a lot of support for you guys. The TACT, which I'll show you in a few minutes, actually can train your entire team of teachers in 20 minutes. And we can always talk about that if you want to bring that into your district. That's easy enough to do. Okay, after identification of the concussion, then what comes next is notification. So no matter how you get information that a concussion has come into your school, whether it's the attendance line, whether it's a coach or an athletic trainer, whether it's a teacher who watches a fall or brings them in from the playground, you're going to want to initiate your concussion management process. And the first thing you're going to want to do is to remove the student from any further high-risk physical activity so that they will not have another hit to the head. So within your process, you will have a little bit of non-contact sports that can be provided, and we recommend that at home as well, but we just don't want them to hit their head again and suffer another concussion. So the first thing is remove and reduce. And then we want to reduce the cognitive demands and the social demands. We don't want to eliminate them totally, but we just want to reduce them. Okay, so notification and communication. So this is where the management process begins to happen. Within our points of vulnerability, what does your law say about notification? I have not seen a law say anything about notification yet. This is something they just expect us in schools to do, and we do really well with all kinds of conditions. So we just want to have a process in place where you are getting the information down to the teachers so they support these students, and then information coming back up again from the teachers to the school nurse, athletic trainer, to be shared with the parent and the clinic. So again, get a release of information, and there are many components within REAP that can help you with this. There are forms and all of that that we can talk about as we work with you this year. Okay, so in terms of management, we just want to let the symptoms educate us on how the student is coming through the recovery of the concussion. Basically, a concussion's an energy drain. So when you have a concussion, I always say to my kids, when you have a concussion, you're like an iPhone 6 instead of an iPhone, I think 16 now. You're just on a very low battery and you're just not holding your charge well enough. And so they feel much like this little cartoon character here. So we just want to put supports in place and then be able to manage their symptoms. And we want to adjust and accommodate whatever the demands are for them. So we're adjusting their academic supports, sometimes, accommodating or, things like having an elevator key or having a second set of books and those kinds of things. So we're just supporting them for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of a concussion. This is right here where we're going to load in your TACT so that we can give immediate academic adjustments to the teachers immediately at the point that the student comes back to school. So you might be the first one to hear that they had a concussion. They may be out for a couple of days, and then they come back to school within a couple of days, and we want their teachers to be ready for them. And the easiest way to do that is going to be through the TACT, which I'm going to actually take you through in a minute. So we just remove, reduce, educate, and adjust and accommodate for a couple of weeks until we can eventually get to clearance. I'm going to jump forward now to return to play on the points of vulnerability because this is a part that most of you have down pretty well. We're 20 years into concussion management return to play legislation. So most of your athletic trainers have this down. If you work in a school that doesn't have an athletic trainer, you might still be struggling with getting these kids back to PE and play at recess. But the criteria for clearance or criteria towards clearance is going to be when the parent feels that they are back to their baseline symptoms, when the teachers feel they're back to their pre-concussion learning level, and when you as the school nurse is or the athletic trainer is feeling like you're not having any concussion symptoms and they're not coming to the clinic anymore for symptoms, and then the healthcare provider can start the graduated return to play steps. They go through those and then they hopefully clear. So that's the process for return to sport, return to play, and that's how that your law aligns with REAP. Now, if we look at the points of vulnerability, what does your law say about return to play? It generally tells us that, as your law says here, that students can't go back to scrimmage or play until they've been cleared. But what our points of vulnerability will ask is, well, what about the non-athlete who's going back to PE or play? What about kids who don't fall under your return to play legislation? What about, notification and wider communication once there's clearance? Do you have that in place? So those are all just icing on the cake if you want to add more to your return to play components. And we don't want to forget the non-athletes here, the kids who have motor vehicle accidents, and those kids have to go back to play in a safe way as well. So the criteria towards clearance, this is straight out of the REAP manual, is like I said, when the parent is feeling that they are back to baseline with symptoms, when the school teacher is feeling like they're back to their pre-concussion learning level, if there is neurocognitive testing, they're back to baseline with that or where you think they should be with their neurocognitive testing. If an athletic trainer or physical therapist, occupational therapist has been seeing them when they're successfully discharged and when they're not on medications for symptoms of concussion. That would be the criteria towards clearance that would say it would be safe to start to move them towards their return to play and back to sports and those activities. So basically, what REAP wants to do is to create a vortex of information where all of the teams are contributing to what they're seeing, what they're observing in this student, and sharing that information, making sure that we are all on the same page with when it's safe to start them through their graduated return to play steps. Oftentimes they're taken through those steps by an athletic trainer. If they're not, if there's not an athletic trainer at that school, which there's often not in middle schools or elementary school, what is the process for that? Often it's parents or healthcare providers. And so we basically just want to have a very, um, cohesive and interdisciplinary team approach to getting these kids back to play. And once they have been approved to start the graduated return to play steps, they go through these steps, which you're very familiar with because these have been around since the beginning of concussion management. And this is how athletes go back to play. In REAP, there is a checklist for symptom monitoring. You might have your favorite. There are many symptom monitor, checklists out there, but this is one out of REAP. And then there's a teacher feedback form in REAP where we encourage the student to go get feedback from their teacher and bring it to us, whether it's you in a school or me in a clinic, so that we have a place for the teachers to give some input on whether they're still giving academic adjustments, whether they're still seeing symptoms, or whether the student is back to their pre-concussion learning level. So that's how we use this academic symptom screen. I know that many of the schools that I talk to struggle with the non-athlete or the younger student who's been out of PE or play at recess. How do they get back to to PE or play at recess? How do they get cleared? If a parent isn't going to take them to a doctor for follow-up, we of course say it's best practice to go to a doctor. It's best practice to be cleared that way. But if you're struggling with getting a couple of those students back because they're not going to, we have what we call the 4 scenarios, which walks you through a process of trying to safely but carefully get these students back to play if they're not falling under your return to play legislation. Okay, so that's a really quick overview of REAP, and we can definitely come out and not. I can't come out from Colorado, but I suppose we can virtually have many training sessions with you as in your district if you want us to help you to create your processes and get some of these in place. But I want to switch gears a little bit to return to school and return to learn, because that's really the area that we're working on this year in Colorado and in other states is to really beef up that area. So, and when we go to, districts or points of vulnerability and say, do you have that in place? That's where most of the districts are struggling. So I'm going to start with return to school, which in my mind is it is different than return to learn. Okay, these terms are not interchangeable in my mind. Return to school in my mind is a seat in the seat, which means that the student physically returns back to school. And that's often not up to us in schools to oversee. That is something that we want our parents to send them back to school. We want the healthcare provider to encourage the parent to send them back to school, generally within a couple of days, knowing that they're still going to have symptoms. So, the biggest barrier that I find to kids not coming back to school is a parent and a healthcare provider feeling like their symptoms are flaring at school. And so they don't trust that the student is comfortable there. And I think one of the biggest things that REAP and TAC can do for your district and for Nebraska is to share with your parents and your healthcare providers that you have REAP and TAC in place. We know how to support these students as they come back in. And go ahead and send them back so that they're getting instruction, and we will give them a nice soft landing, a place for them to land and deal with their symptoms and still continue to learn through this process. So that's one of the main things that, nice little confidence building. But when we talk about return to learn, that is within our scope of practice in schools. That is what the teachers do to support students so that we can continue to teach them, continue to have them at school, but keep their symptoms down. And because you are a state that actually has an amendment about return to learn, when we go to the points of vulnerability, what does your law say about return to learn? Your law actually says we need to have you need to have a protocol in place for return to learn, and that may vary school by school, district by district. That's going to fit within our MTSS model. So what we're going to do here is just give you the resource of TAC because it's a nice, easy way to fill in your return to learn protocol. So what is the TAC? The TAC stands for the Teacher Acute Concussion Tool. It is an automated digital tool that you as nurses or healthcare techs or health techs or athletic trainers or counselors can have access to. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes to fill out. It'll send up to 20 emails up to teachers, to the parents, to coaches, to administrators for the first initial email, and then it will automatically send follow-up emails at weeks 2, 3, and 4 with all kinds of information about how to support the student in the classroom, attached tip sheets, and just nice, easy ways for teachers to support our students for the first 4 weeks of a concussion. Our preliminary research is showing that it increases knowledge in the teacher, confidence in the teacher, and it changes their practice in the classroom. So it's a great, easy way for you to get return to learn across your district. And the one way that I want you to kind of think about this, it's a little bit of a different approach than what we have had in the past. Um, and it aligns very much with the public health model. So if we were talking about flu, you know that there are 3 areas in a public health model, and our biggest bang for our buck, 80 to 90% of prevention and keeping flu down is by what we do in that primary universal level. So we're going to educate people to um, wash their hands and to sneeze into their elbows and to wear masks if they're sick. And a smaller percentage are going to move up to they're still going to get the flu, they still need Tamiflu, and then a very small percentage is going to move up and need to have hospitalization. Well, if you look at what we do in schools, that is our MTSS model. We already have this in place. We do this. It's either called MTSS or RTI in all of our schools. And it breaks down to tier 1, which is gen ed. So 80 to 90% of what we do will really help if we do it in our gen ed classroom, with our classroom teachers. A smaller percentage will go up to 504s, and then a very small percentage will go up to special education. So this fits nicely with concussion. If you apply concussion to this, then we know that 70% of our kids will get better with just what our teachers do to support. And those we call academic adjustments. A smaller percentage need to go up to a longer term supports, and we call those academic accommodations. And that might be tier 2 and a 504, and a very small percentage of kids who might have had a concussion that really then turns into a long-term TBI might go to special education, and we call those academic modifications. So when we are training teachers, we want to speak their language. We talk to them about we need them to support kids in the classroom in this order. First, symptom management so that they are attending and hearing instruction. Then, because of slow processing speed, we're going to adjust their workload management, which is removal and reduction of work. And then finally, how are we going to hold this student accountable for mastery and grades? So when we train our teachers, we talk to them about these 3 things in this order only. And here are tip sheets. This is just a sample of the tip sheets that go with them. And I'm going to get you into the TACT in a minute, and you'll have all of those as well. We did a study, an implementation study in Colorado last year where we brought on 4 districts, and we asked these districts to come forward and let us work with them for the year so that we could bring on TACT and help them implement it 100% across their district. And you can see that we ranged from rural to inner city districts. We had small districts. We had a large district of 100,000. And we worked with them all year long to get implementation across the district. You can see that with District 4, I only had about 5 months to work with them, where basically trained their teachers, or trained their school nurses to catch all of the concussions so that we could train their teachers with them. In 5 months, we had 773 teachers trained around real-time students coming back to the classroom with a concussion. And I just checked it this week, and in the first month or so of school already, that district has just continued to roll forward and trained another 217 teachers around real-time TACs or real-time concussions. So in Colorado, we had 32 districts who then jumped on. And so the Colorado Department of Education just made the TACT their return to learn guidance. And so that's what we want to bring into Nebraska as well. We have 5 slots available this year for 5 districts in Nebraska, and we want you to tell us if you're ready to learn this and ready for us to support you, because we will walk with you this year and work with you all the way through. Andrea, Peggy, myself will do technical support and bring you on. If you are interested and you know you're a district that can bring on Return to Learn right away, go ahead and put that in the chat. We'll take note of that, or email me at Karen@getschooled-on-concussions, or email Andrea, A.N. Riley at childrensnebraska.org. So we really want a couple of districts. We want rural districts, charter schools, private schools to come on board and work with us to get you going 100% with implementation as well. So we'll come back to that in a minute. What we're going to do right now, you're probably wondering, is like, what am I signing up for? And what does this mean if I, am a district that brings in the TACT? Well, I'm going to show you how easy it is to do the TACT. So we're going to make up a kid here. We're going to make up a student named Eric. He's a 15-year-old sophomore. He goes to Ace High School. His student ID number is 1111. He's a very good student with a diagnosis of ADHD. And typical, he's very excited to get his driver's license. And right around Thanksgiving, he had his birthday, got his driver's license, and then got involved in a motor vehicle accident right at the beginning of December. So he stayed home for a couple of days, and now we know he's going to come back to school. And we're going to pretend that you are the nurse who is going to bring back in Eric. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the TAC together. And I'm going to ask that you actually do this with me, because if you don't go in and do this now, you won't receive all of the emails and the tip sheets. There are about 15 tip sheets that come automatically just by going through this process. So I want you to do this with me. If you have a computer in front of you, if you go to getschooledonconcussions.com, so getschooledonconcussions.com, and then when you get into that, you will see our website, and the bright orange My TACT button up at the top right. Pull that down and go straight to Nebraska. And you will see, so Nebraska has its own TACT. If you don't want to do it with your computer, you want to do it with your phone, it's easy enough to do as well. Just put your phone up to this QR code and it will take you there as well. Another way to get in is that the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska has had the TACT up and available for you all this time. So if you want to go in through them as well, you can click on that button and that will take you to the same place. But once you get in, whether it's the phone or the computer, you're going to get to this Welcome Nebraska Educator page. And when you get to this page, I want you to put in this password, and it is case specific. So put in capital TACT and then lowercase Nebraska 2020. So I'll give you a second to put that in, capital TACT lowercase Nebraska 2020. Once you put that in, it's going to take you to this Welcome Nebraska Educators landing site. And because we're all Return to Learn initiators, we are going to try to get information to Eric's teachers, knowing that he's coming back tomorrow. You're going to click on Access TACT. When you click on Access TACT, you only have 2 questions there. Are you doing this in real time? Because there's a student coming back to back to the classroom within the next couple of days. Or are you doing this for training? So remember I said that we can train your entire staff in 20 minutes. We can, and that would be through this training process. But for today, we want you to check this out under real time. So we know Eric is coming back probably tomorrow, so click on real time. When you click on real time, it's going to open up the TACT, and this is where you're going to put your name in. So put your name in. Don't put Andrea's name in. Put your first and your last name in, and put your school email in, because you're the one initiating this TACT for the teachers. And your name and all of that's going to show up in the email. So put your name, first and last name, and your school email. And then you're going to put the school that you're at. So Eric is at Ace High School. I know you probably have 2 or 3 schools, but you're covering Ace High School today, and Eric's coming back tomorrow to Ace High School, and then your district. And then if you go to the role at school, it's a drop-down menu. So choose your discipline. You can see in there, nurses, primarily when I work with districts in the 7 states that I'm working with, it's primarily nurses that are initiating the TAC, but it's sometimes the health tech, sometimes the school psychologist, sometimes the counselor. So click on nurse or whatever your discipline is. And then you're going to put the student ID number in. So if you remember that Eric's student ID number was 1111. So put that in. We don't want any identifying information on the student in the TACT. So we just want the student ID number so you can track that by number. And then this is the part that everybody really loves, where you start to add in the emails. So if you click on that plus sign, you can start to add in all of Eric's teachers. So if you want to, you can put your own Gmail email in there. This would be, you would look up Eric's teachers, you would put in his math teacher, English teacher, you might include his parent, you might include his coach, you might include an administrator. You can add up to 20. So you can add a few in there right now today, or you can just kind of skip that. And then we want to know how they got this concussion. So we know for Eric, he had a motor vehicle accident. So click on that motor vehicle accident. And then there's an area where you can upload some information. If we come out and if you're one of the districts where we're doing training and implementation, we can do more with you on that. But right now, let's just skip that part. And then you have to answer the question, is this student an elementary, middle, or high school student? Well, we know Eric's a high school student, so click on high school. There's one more question to answer here. If it's an elementary student, there's no more questions. But for a middle or high school student, there's one more question, and that is the time of the semester. And that is because if it's close to the end of the semester, there's an extra tip sheet that is shared with the teachers about how to deal with finals. So we know it's December 7th or close to that time for Eric. So go ahead and click on 5. I like to think of this kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4. I often think of it as September, October, November, December, or no, wait, no, September, October, November, no, August, September, October, November, December, something like that. So that's how you can click, choose the time of the grading period. Okay. What you will get in your email in a minute, if you haven't already, is this first initial notification. So what the TAC does is it notifies the teachers that you are letting them know that this student number 1111 is coming back to their classroom with a concussion, and it's coming from you, and they need to sit out of PE and sports, and they need to not hit their head again, basically. And then the rest of the email goes through mental fatigue, slow processing speed. What do we do with workload? What do we do with mastery and grades and all of that? And it's color coded. And then these attached tip sheets are also added in so that the teachers can go to those and read more if they would like. So they know how to support Eric. And then automatically at this same time next week, you're going to get follow-up ed for week 2, week 3, and week 4. Because remember, 70% of kids with a concussion get better in 4 weeks. So that's why the TACT is built for 4 weeks. It reminds the teachers to keep supporting Eric, the student 1111. It reminds them to start to fade back the some of the supports and keep asking for a little bit more from them. Okay. If anybody had any trouble getting in to the TACT, I want to put this slide up one more time just so that you can do it if you are running a little bit behind. Okay. And I wanted to leave some time for questions and for some input from Andrea or anybody else. So I looks like I have left plenty of time. So if everybody has gone into the TACT, I'm going to stop sharing here and open it up for questions and see if any of your districts feel like you are ready and want to be one of the districts that comes on board so that we can work with you on implementation this year. Um, and also open it up for Andrea to add anything, Peggy to add anything.
Sure. Well, you did have a question further up here from Desiree. Where did I find it? Excuse me. Oh, yes. She asked, does the school nurse wait for medical diagnosis before notification is sent out to school staff?
That's a good question, Desiree. So that is a little bit based upon what your district decides. Okay, so within every district, and you're creating your concussion protocol, there are some districts that are, you know, a little bit stricter on this area versus that area. Some districts have said, you know, as part of our process that we want to have medical confirmation before we start our process. If that's what your district wants to do, then wait for that, and then you'll start sending out the TACT and start the process. But other districts are like, you know, knowledge is, you know, they hit their head, they are acting like they have a concussion, and so it's still our obligation in a school to support that academically. So they'll have, you know, a lower threshold. So that's why, you know, once you get a copy of REAP and you kind of get the skeleton of it, you can adjust this however you want to, that fits with whatever fits with your admin and what you feel comfortable with. Also kind of aligning it with what the state is recommending, with Andrea, and, you know, a lot of input from your children's Nebraska. So that's how you can use REAP as a skeleton and then jump off and decide on those kind of specifics. But wherever the threshold is, then start the process once you guys feel comfortable with it. Peggy, do you want, I see you put in here a little bit about, oh, ETA on REAP. That's what the question is. So do you want to jump in, Andrea and Peggy, on where we are with that?
I can just add my as a group, we're still fine tuning a few of the words. If I have my wish and my prayer, it's that it will be ready to go no later than the end of October. I think it might even be ready sooner than that, but I also don't want to make promises that I can't keep. So keep an eye out for it. And Andrea, I'm pretty sure you said that you've got everyone's email and you'll forward it out when the time comes. The other thing to keep in mind, we'll always have it available on our Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska website. So if you can't remember anything else, Google Brain Injury Nebraska, and most likely Brain Injury Alliance will pop up for you, and we will have it also available there. I'll add one more little plug. Just a little bit about the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska. We are statewide. We have what we call resource facilitators, which provide support to families and to youth with brain injury. So, you know, as Karen talked about this, certainly the hope and the prayer is that folks will get better quicker and you won't even need to worry about it for long term. But we also recognize there's this percentage that do live with a chronic disability because of brain injury. And if that is something you know, of your students or families members that are dealing with that, we here at the Brain Injury Alliance can provide some support for that. We oftentimes find that people are really struggling with, you know, how to be an advocate for themselves and how do they work with their schools or with, you know, whoever in their community, and we can help with that. So just know that you're not alone. We love working with Karen, and the fact that she's willing to help us get this launched in Nebraska is nothing short of amazing and wonderful. But we also have a whole team of staff members, again, statewide, that can be of support to you and your students along the way.
And I just like to say thank you, because it is the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska that's providing the funding so that the TAC tool is free for Nebraska educators, correct?
Yep, we were
Yeah.
able to find some grant funds to make this available, and the hope is that we'll be able to continue to do that. There's several states, and Karen knows which ones have found the funding to keep it alive and going. We're very thankful that we here in Nebraska are able to make that happen. And obviously, we as a Brain Injury Alliance are very passionate about this, and whatever we can do to get education and support to those students. You know, they are seriously students first and their players second. And I think so frequently our community, our schools think of it's just a sports injury. And as you saw from Karen's information, it is not just a sports injury. This is kids on playgrounds. It's, car accidents, it's assaults, you name it. A lot of the kids may be dealing with what look like behavioral problems in your school. If you dug a little deeper, you might find that there's maybe a history of brain injury there. So keep that in mind too as you do some work with the youth in your schools.
I had a question. I had put in the chat. For data purposes for the state of Nebraska, do you want us to use, is it okay to use our district ID for the student? Because they're different, or do we use the state ID? Will that matter? I think that's more like for Andrea, if we're looking at the data, or I don't know if that's what do you think?
I think that could be something we talk about. And Andrea, I didn't know you guys had a state ID. So, I mean, every state I work with is a little bit different. So we could definitely talk through how you want to do that. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but the other side of this is there is a dashboard. Every time you all enter a student into the TACT, it automatically keeps track of that student's ID and all of the different teachers that you have sent the TAC to. The beauty of that is when we have a parent who says, my son had a concussion and nobody did anything to tell the teachers. Well, actually, you now can, we'll work with Andrea and Peggy, who are in charge of the dashboard. You can actually get that data and say, no, actually, these 7 teachers were informed. Now, whether they read the emails and do things differently is a different thing. That's about as far as I can take it, is just to get them that information, and we hope they do the right thing. But so there's that. It's helpful to have that, and that dashboard will be keeping track of all of your data, and none of that is shared with anywhere outside of Andrea and Peggy. And the TACT, for us, we don't know who those students are because it's by number. So you can feel comfortable that it's confidential. So however we decide, whatever it's best to do in terms of like which number, we can certainly talk that through.
But because they'd already be accessing it through the Nebraska specific portal, they probably wouldn't need to enter the state ID, right?
I wouldn't think so, because everything will go directly through Nebraska. Yeah.
So district, great question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So at some point, when you guys start using it, and you start, every time you have notification that a student has a concussion, and instead of going to the emails that you go to and start typing those up, you're just going to use the TACT instead, which notifies, but also gives the teachers 4 weeks of support and tip sheets. The nice thing too is at the end of the year, you are going to know how many concussions you had, because we tracked them by return to learn, not return to play. When we track by return to play, we're only getting the athletes that are going back. And that for every student, that had an athletic injury, we probably have another student who has an injury from a non-athletic mechanism. So in the end, you're going to know how many concussions you have. You're also going to know how many hundreds of teachers you have trained in support of students coming back into the classroom. And all of that, of course, then in that public health model, then tends to bring down the number of kids who bump up to tier 2 and have exacerbated anxiety and all of the other things that come with concussion, because we and the teachers didn't support it quick enough. So we want to reduce the amount of kids that go up to a 504, because we're going to support this right away. So you're basically building a really nice foundation in your school, in your district, with your teachers to support these students immediately. And then that would be something that when it bumps up to you, we know that everything has been done for the first 4 weeks, because, the TAC delivered that, and it was a nice way to train our teachers.
Hey, Karen, there's some questions in the chat. Do you want to ask those?
Get those. Okay. Let me know if I'm missing any that you're seeing, Peggy, but I see one. Any concerns about violating personal information, health status when sending emails to other staff? that one again too, I think you want to have a conversation with your admin on the need to know. Again, some are very, I'm only going to send it to the teachers. But I also have districts who've said, I feel like an admin needs to know on every single one of these. So you can decide on who you think needs to know, and make sure you're comfortable with the content. So that's why I want you to have the TAC so that you can read this and see what the TAC says. We took a lot of time to make sure we wrote it up so that it doesn't say anything that's specific at all about a student, and that it doesn't obligate teachers to do things that parents are like, no, it says you can't take tests. No, it actually says, if it's not essential, is there another way they could get assessed on this material? So see if you feel comfortable with it, and then decide on who needs to know in your district. And that's who you will send the TAC to. Where does daily documentation of student progress go for persons on the team? So the TAC, again, a bit of a paradigm shift. It's unlike how we've been doing return to learn in the past, which is if a student, what are their symptoms today? So what are their interventions? The TAC is much more, here's education to your teachers. If the student is feeling lousy, whether that's from headache or dizziness or nausea, you're going to do the same thing, which is to let them put their head down, let them have a little break in their day, those kinds of things. So the TAC does not collect data back from your teachers. There is a way that can be built into your process. And again, we can, if you're one of the districts that wants us to come out and work with you, we can help you build that process in. But that kind of information we don't want in the TAC because we want to respect the privacy of the students. So it's information down to teachers, and then we build a different system on information back from teachers to you that is only internal to your district. I hope I answered that well.
I was actually wondering if you could go back to the flow sheet and talk a little bit, sorry, to go back to REAP and talk a little bit about the distinction, because we talked about it amongst us while we're developing the poster and things about adjustments and accommodations and like tier 1 supports. Would you mind just going over that again, just to
No,
refresh
not
our
at
memory?
all. Let me share again, and I'll go back into that. Sorry, don't look. I don't want to make you sick. Okay. So, so basically all of that language that Andrea's talking about, can you see my pyramid here? Okay, good. So really all of this language, comes from public health models, comes from your MTSS model, your tier 1, 2, and 3. And it was actually, when I wrote REAP, the first version of REAP was called Remove, Educate, Accommodate, Pace. And it was school districts that said to me, you don't want to use the word accommodate because we're talking about nice, easy, informal academic supports in the classroom. And if you use the word accommodate, for us as educators, we often think of that as a 504. So we picked another A word, which is a neutral word, which is adjustments. So everything we do in REAP and the TACT, you can tell where the student is in the process of recovery just by using the words, we are making academic adjustments for them, meaning the teacher is allowed to do many of those nice little things that we know teachers do. Let them put their head down, let them go get a drink of water, let them take their eyes off the book, let them, have a book on tape, all of these kinds of nice things that teachers do every day for our kids when they have the flu and they feel lousy. And we're not making it a formal process like a 504. But those same academic interventions that now have to go on to weeks 4, 5, 6, and beyond because the student didn't have a typical recovery would now maybe be more formalized into a 504 plan. And we want to call those academic accommodations. So maybe we're not going to front load as many of those academic adjustments, but by the time we get to accommodations, it's going to be 1 or 2 things that we still need to have in place. So we're just being sticklers about words because those words mean something to us as educators, meaning informal and easy to do by the teacher versus more formalized and something that we get involved, myself as a school psychologist, the school nurse, we, bump up at a tier 2. And so, not to make you sick, but let's go to the right here. So when we got to the academic, what we built, starting to do your flow chart, the adjust accommodate page, we really wanted to make it very clear that the TACT is providing academic adjustments to teachers. It's giving them a lot of ideas on nice, gentle, easy things to keep the symptoms at bay so the student attends school, so that they hear instruction, so that we can go on and then start to adjust their work. If they've never heard instruction, they'll never be able, the teachers can't adjust their work. So the TACT is all kinds of interventions that are academic adjustments because they are provided within the first 4 weeks of a concussion. However, if you have, and you should still have 20, 30% of your kids who don't get better, sorry, now we're going to, oh, don't look. Sorry to make you sick. Here. If you have a small percentage of kids who don't get better, where is that? Right there. Who don't get better in the 4 weeks, and now they are moving up to, we're having to figure out, why is this student a medical outlier? Why do they still have symptoms at 4, 5, 6 weeks? Maybe it's more of a medical problem, like a vestibular issue. Maybe it's more of a psychological problem. Maybe it's an underlying learning disability or a flaring of anxiety. And we want to keep supports in place for them longer. That would be when we bump that up to academic accommodations. So we're going to figure out, we're going to take this to the problem-solving team. Related service providers are going to put their heads together. You as nurses are probably going to be involved in here. And this is where we want the bulk of your work to be. And we're going to keep things in place longer. And those are tier 2, and those are called academic accommodations versus academic adjustments. So just a little, is there anything you'd like to add to that, Andrea?
That's a really good explanation. Thank you. That clears up a lot of things for me too. So thanks.
Now, I know that when I go out and do trainings, most of the nurses are like, yes, but what about this kiddo that didn't get better? He's 3 months out. Or what about this mom who won't take them back to the doctor and we're still dealing with that? And what I always say is those are tier 2. Those are difficult. You deal with them every day. I deal with them every day as a school psychologist and then in my clinic. But unless we figure out a way to push down into tier 1 and support for the first 4 weeks, we're going to have more of those bumping up. So let me answer those questions after we get the TACT running smoothly in your district. So that's kind of why we don't mean to disregard those questions. We will definitely answer those questions, and I can do trainings for you on those as well. But we want to get the TACT going smoothly. We want to get your processes in place. And I know there were a bunch of different districts who said they were interested. And so Andrea will get a copy, right, of the chat so that we can maybe debrief and circle back and see which districts we're going to go with this year.
I'm writing these down right now. So
okay,
yep.
Good. So we will start with the districts who are ready to get going. We'll work with you this year. Once you get the TACT in place, once you kind of have your processes in place, then I'm always happy to do a tier 2 training for you, which are those complicated cases. How do I know he's malingering? How do I know when someone needs vestibular therapy? I can give you all of those trainings. We can do that virtually. But we want to have all of those levels in place as well.
I just want to remind everyone, and I know, Karen, you talked a bit about the concussion laws, but just a reminder to all of us in Nebraska that it is a law that all schools must have a protocol in place to help manage the needs of kids with brain injury, whether that's a concussion or an accident due to a car accident and whatnot. But so if your school doesn't have that protocol in place and you're like, or you've had it in place for 5 years and you're finding that it doesn't really work, or you don't have a good process in place, let us know, because it's these kind of tools that can be there to help you make sure that there's that good communication. Because we recognize it's one thing to have a policy, it's a whole nother thing to actually have a protocol that works. So I encourage you to go back and look at your protocols that you have, your policies that you have, and ask yourself, is this working and are we capturing these kids?
Great point. And when you get REAP, you can also kind of align it with that, make sure that's in place. And if you don't know where to start, just download that points of vulnerability form off of the Get Schooled and just do a home inspection in your district. And you'll find the areas where you're like, oh, we don't have much in place here. I'm going to reach out to Peggy or Andrea or Karen and say, can you help, fill this part in? So we have a lot. PLCS. I hope you know all of what these mean, Andrea, and
Sure do. That's Papillion La Vista.
very
Yeah.
good.
So we got
Excellent.
Serena Bowen in Fullerton, and she's interested in Sue Fjellstad in Bellevue. Annette Kennedy, Sutherland Public Schools, Katie Anderson, West Point, Hollinger Hoda in Papillion, like we said. And interested in more information is Connie Riccini in Gretna Public Schools, Sarah Bird, Elkhorn. And that's an awesome group. So if anybody else is interested, let me know. But that's who I got down so far. So that's awesome, actually.
That is great. We are going to be busy this year, but I'm going to have a lot of help with Andrea and Peggy, and I guess we'll probably reconvene, Andrea and Peggy, and figure out how we want to get started, and we'll reach out to you guys, and then we'll start setting up meetings, and I'll get you going with the implementation.
Yeah. If I do, would you mind if I entirely sure is finalized or not, but I'll just let you guys know what at least it looks like to see as a preview of coming attractions, if you wouldn't mind. So when we do get these REAP manuals printed out, we're also going to include a printed poster for your schools here. And this kind of summarizes the steps that you need to take in the REAP manual. And then it refers to the page numbers of it. So you can, look back for to see more specifics of what it says. And it has the QR code that'll take you right to the REAP manual and everything. So this is what will be printed off and come into your schools pretty soon, probably in the next month or so. But yeah, we're happy to have that in just to give you some easily implementable tools for you and your schools that can really make a difference. I know we've had webinars before. We've talked about this a lot in concussions and things, but I like this because it's a little bit different of an angle, and we're really looking at those kids and how to serve them academically, like at their best once they come back from a concussion. So, all right, we got one more from Ralston. Cool, thank you, Cindy. I'm writing you down. Is there any other questions?
We have a question there about coming back in after inpatient psych or with new meds. And I guess I would say just, there's definitely the kids who have a more severe injury. They're coming back. They need to go straight into a 504. Or they need to go straight into special education. You want to go ahead and do those just like you would normally go ahead and do those like you have in the past. But Peggy and I can kind of help you with any of that if you need to as well. We have Co-Kids in Colorado, which I don't know how much you guys have had exposure to, but Co-Kids with braininjury.com in Colorado, which is a 104-page manual on brain injury support. So we can do that. But keep in mind, TACT and REAP are specific for Tier 1. They're on the other end of the spectrum there. Gen Ed, classroom teachers, Gen Ed, first 4 weeks. And then we can also talk about the other things that are on the other end. Co-Kids is more for Tier 3 special education generally.
But as Karen has said, we're hoping we don't get to Tier 3 with these kids. We can manage it at Tier 1. That's the message we want everyone to hear today. Managing it early can hopefully prevent the Tier 2, Tier 3 needs. So
that is our goal. But we know that there are those. But in Colorado, we have all 3 tiers covered for supports. And, we can do more of that with Nebraska moving forward if need to. Yes, if the concussion stops before 4 weeks, there is a way that we can stop the ongoing emails. Yes.
And Karen, I'm
Well,
here because you've worked with Bellevue, that you would encourage us right now to go ahead and start the TACT. And then maybe in the next few weeks, the new manual for REAP will be out, and then we can kind of just review our protocol.
That's exactly what I would recommend. And generally with all districts, when you're ready, like once I train your return to learn initiators to catch the concussions and start the TACT, we just let that go for a couple weeks to a month. And then we meet again and for you to see your data and how many concussions you've caught and how many teachers you've trained is the most motivating thing. And it really hooks you to be like, okay, we're going to continue to do this. Because those kids are getting immediate support. It's a beautiful thing to see.
I just want to say thank you to Andrea and NDE also. They've been very generous with Andrea's time, and really thankful that they're willing to help promote this for all students with brain injury across the state. And Andrea, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I think there'll be more stuff going up on the NDE website also to help keep it kind of front and center for you guys also.
yes, absolutely. And just, nothing bothers me more than when there's a free tool out there that people don't know about. So I want to make sure that like, hey, we have this great thing for teachers, and I just want to make sure it's being utilized and we can actually, get it to help the kids. And so that's what today is all about. So I don't want to keep it any longer because we're already over time. But if you have any more questions, please feel free to email me. But this has been great. I'm so excited about the enthusiasm we have today and just all the people we had on. I appreciate everybody here. So thank you so much. And Karen and Peggy, anything else before we adjourn?
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coordinating all of this. And we look forward to working with all of you guys in the next year, coming years.
Yeah, thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Andrea.
Mhm.